The world watched with a mix of hope and anxiety, eyes glued to screens in every corner of the globe. From bustling city squares to quiet living rooms, people gathered, united by a single question. Could this be the moment history changed course? US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin arrived in Alaska, a location chosen for its neutrality, distant from the devastation in Ukraine, yet close enough to remind everyone of the stakes at hand. The air was thick with anticipation as the two leaders stepped onto the tarmac, their entourages trailing behind, the world's attention fixed on every move. The stakes were enormous. After 3 years of brutal conflict with thousands of lives lost and millions displaced, the world wondered if this summit could finally bring peace. The conflict in Ukraine had become a symbol of global instability, and the hope for resolution rested on these talks. President Trump, ever the showman, promised a breakthrough, vowing to do what others could not. He spoke of bold moves and historic agreements, determined to leave his mark on the world stage. Yet critics warned of risky concessions, fearing that the desire for a quick deal might overshadow the need for lasting solutions. Political analysts debated fiercely, while protesters outside demanded accountability and justice for Ukraine. The war had devastated Ukraine, leaving cities in ruins and families torn apart. The conflict had redrawn alliances, forcing nations to reconsider old friendships and rivalries. The global economy felt the strain, energy prices soared, supply chains faltered, and uncertainty rippled through markets from New York to Tokyo. Everyday people faced rising costs and empty shelves, a reminder that war's impact knows no borders. Previous negotiations had failed, leaving a trail of broken promises and dashed hopes. This face-to-face meeting was a high-risk gamble, a last-ditch effort to break the deadlock. Success could transform Trump's legacy, casting him as a peacemaker on the world stage, a leader who dared to try when others hesitated. But failure could embolden Russia, deepen the crisis, and send shockwaves through the international order. For Putin, the summit was a chance to assert Russian power and test the resolve of the West. As the leaders arrived, anticipation was palpable. This was more than a meeting. It was a test of American resolve and Russian intentions. Security was tight, journalists jostled for position, and every detail was scrutinized for hidden meaning. Would a ceasefire be brokered, or would the violence continue? The world's hopes rested on the possibility of a signature on a piece of paper, a handshake that could end the bloodshed. Could a lasting peace be forged, or would this summit become just another chapter in a long history of failed diplomacy? The stakes had never been higher. The world held its breath, knowing the outcome could shape history for generations to come. In every time zone, people waited for news that could alter the course of nations. The summit's significance lay not just in what would be said, but in what might be sacrificed for peace. Every word, every gesture carried the weight of millions of lives. The quiet before the first handshake was a silent acknowledgement of the stakes. The questions were many, the answers few. The world waited, suspended between hope and fear, as history prepared to unfold. The next few hours would determine the future of a war-torn region and perhaps the fate of the world itself. The summit was a spectacle, carefully staged, with every detail orchestrated for maximum impact. Cameras flashed as the world's attention zeroed in on the grand entrance, the anticipation in the air almost palpable. The event was more than just a diplomatic gathering, it was a performance, with each leader playing their part on the world stage. Both leaders were flanked by their most trusted aides, each advisor chosen for their loyalty and expertise. The table was set not just for negotiation, but for a subtle contest of influence and presence, as every gesture and whisper was scrutinized by the watching world. Trump and Putin's handshake, firm and deliberate, was broadcast worldwide. Their shared limousine ride became a symbol of potential cooperation, but also of the complex relationship between the two nations. The world watched, searching for signs of genuine rapport or hidden tension. After 3 hours behind closed doors, both leaders emerged to face the press. Their statements were optimistic, yet notably vague, offering little insight into what had actually transpired during their lengthy discussions. Trump called the meeting a 10 out of 10, claiming significant progress had been made. Yet, when pressed for specifics, he offered only generalities, leaving journalists and observers hungry for real answers. There was no ceasefire, no signed agreement, and no concrete commitments, just positive atmospherics and carefully chosen words. The substance of the talks remained elusive, hidden behind diplomatic smiles. Putin echoed Trump's upbeat tone, describing the talks as constructive. Yet, like his counterpart, he withheld any meaningful details, leaving the true outcomes shrouded in ambiguity. The synchronized optimism of both leaders masked a lack of substance. Their smiles for the cameras seemed more rehearsed than heartfelt, raising questions about what, if anything, had truly been achieved. Around the globe, analysts and citizens alike were left guessing. Speculation ran rampant as to whether any real decisions had been made, or if the summit was simply a show of unity without depth. Trump floated the idea of a future summit with Ukraine's President Zelensky, hinting at ongoing diplomatic efforts, and the possibility of further high-stakes meetings. Putin's reply, next time in Moscow, was ambiguous, leaving observers to wonder if it was a genuine invitation or a subtle power play, a reminder of Russia's influence on the world stage. The summit was rich in symbolism, with grand gestures and ceremonial photo ops, but critically short on verifiable progress or concrete outcomes. As the doors closed and the leaders departed, it became clear, the real negotiations, the ones that would shape the future, had yet to truly begin. After the summit, the White House fell silent. Trump celebrated his 10 out of 10 meeting, but official channels offered no details. The usual post-summit briefings and readouts were missing, fueling speculation. Was there real progress, or just empty promises? The lack of information suggested either internal confusion or a deliberate strategy to keep options open. This silence bred mistrust among allies and allowed Russia to shape the narrative. Instead of projecting control, the administration appeared disorganized. The Kremlin quickly filled the void, undermining Trump's claims of success. Without a clear message from Washington, the world looked to Moscow for answers. The administration's failure to communicate left its achievements in doubt. The silence spoke louder than any statement. Any hope of a Russian shift vanished quickly. Days after the summit, Foreign Minister Lavrov restated Russia's hardline demands: Ukrainian neutrality, demilitarization, and a Russian veto over Kiev's security. These were not terms for compromise, but for victory. Lavrov insisted that any security guarantees for Ukraine must include Russia and China, sidelining the West. The message was clear: the summit changed nothing. Putin played the reasonable negotiator, but Russia's position was unyielding. The gap between summit optimism and reality was exposed. The Kremlin had seized control of the narrative. Confusion deepened as the Trump administration sent mixed signals, leaving both the press and the public scrambling to make sense of the official narrative. Each day seemed to bring a new statement, often contradicting the last, and the uncertainty only grew. President Trump boasted of Article 5-like protections for Ukraine, suggesting a commitment on par with NATO's Mutual Defense Pact. Yet, within hours, he reversed course, clarifying that no U.S. troops would be sent, and that America's role would be limited. The mixed messaging left allies and adversaries alike unsure of where the U.S. truly stood. Special Envoy Witkoff added to the confusion, publicly contradicting Trump by admitting that no ceasefire had actually been reached. He downplayed the so-called guarantees, calling them aspirational rather than binding, further muddying the waters. The administration's story shifted rapidly, from claims of a historic breakthrough to describing the talks as merely a preliminary step. Each update seemed to walk back the previous one, fueling skepticism among journalists and foreign observers. Meanwhile, vague claims of Russian concessions were contradicted by reports that Trump privately supported Russia's continued control of eastern Donbas. The lack of transparency only heightened suspicions about the administration's true intentions. Allies and the public were left guessing, was the U.S. genuinely pushing for peace, or was it quietly enabling a Russian land grab? The uncertainty reverberated across capitals, leaving diplomats and citizens alike anxious about the future. The lack of clarity eroded trust, not just among allies but within the administration itself, making a path to peace seem even more distant and fragile. The administration's credibility gap widened with every conflicting statement, as critics questioned whether the White House could be trusted to keep its word. In the end, the fog of ambiguity only benefited Moscow, giving Russian officials room to maneuver and shape the narrative to their advantage. Around the world, leaders and citizens alike wondered who was really in charge of U.S. policy. Was there a coherent strategy, or just chaos? In the end, the summit's legacy was not consensus or progress, but a deepening sense of confusion and mistrust that would linger long after the cameras stopped rolling. The summit's aftermath sent shockwaves through Europe and Kiev. Ukraine's President Zelensky flatly rejected any deal ceding territory, warning it would only invite more aggression. European leaders, skeptical of Putin's intentions, dismissed Trump's optimism and rejected Russian and Chinese involvement in Ukraine's security. U.S. critics argued that real progress meant arming Ukraine, not negotiating away its land. Special Envoy Witkoff's comments seemed to pressure Ukraine to accept painful concessions. Many saw this as shifting the burden onto the victim, not the aggressor. The West's unity was tested, and Ukraine's resolve hardened. The summit left allies wary, and Ukraine defiant. When the dust settled, the Alaska summit had produced no real progress. There was no joint statement, no agreement, just conflicting interpretations. Russia used the opportunity to reassert its demands, while the U.S. appeared eager but ineffective. The lack of results and mixed messages from Washington weakened the Western position. Russia's terms, Ukrainian surrender, loss of territory, and loss of sovereignty, remained unacceptable. Ukraine refused to yield, and the core issues were as unresolved as ever. The summit highlighted, rather than bridged, the divide. The reality piece was no closer than before. In the end, the summit changed little. Optimism faded, replaced by the reality of entrenched positions and mistrust. Russia's demands, neutrality, demilitarization, territorial concessions, remained firm. Ukraine, backed by Europe, refused to surrender its sovereignty. U.S. messaging was muddled, undermining its credibility. The onus remains on Russia to abandon its ambitions, and on the West to support Ukraine. No genuine peace is possible while Moscow insists on domination. High-profile summits cannot substitute for real change. The road to peace is long, uncertain, and fraught with setbacks. The Alaska meeting was just another chapter in a continuing conflict.